Uh, okay, I got my tea. Freaking burnt myself because I was trying to go so fast. I was trying to go too fast. Oh yeah, is the text backwards? Is it backwards? Give me a sec. Let me schmeckle this peckle. Okay, so it's not backwards. Cool. Excelente. Excelente. Okay. Well, yeah. Thank you to the channel members. Nuffles, Annette Fisher, Steve Hughes, the Yabak, Craigsman, and Elias, I don't know. Joel to become a member. So, yeah, there we go. Any issue. Who's even in here? Who is even in here? Ugh. Yeah, I'm not in the usual flannel or nothing because I was doing some work today. But yeah. So, who's all actually in here? Who is joining me today? Let me turn the volume all the way up. Got some good old fashioned awesome tea with some honey and chamomile sticks. Kevin is in. You're the first person in the live stream today? What is up, Kevin? How you doing? All right. Pitbulls and MMA. Welcome to the live stream. Okay, so I'm gonna give it a second before I jump into this reaction request. So the video that we're gonna be watching is actually a reaction request from Brandon Peters on the Discord. It'll be the second one from him this week, I believe, or third or fourth, because he puts a lot of them in there. He goes ham. He goes ham with the recommendations. So yeah, if y'all want to do that, go ahead and click the link in the chat for the Discord so you could send me video recommendations. Okay. Kevin, I'm doing all right. Just got home from the gym. That sounds good. I was just doing work. Just doing work. Putting some more stuff in the house, make it more of a house and a home. Oy. Protein. Oh yeah, do me a favor, y'all. Make sure you like the live stream as soon as you get in here, so I know how many people are actually in here. Because I don't trust the little ticker timer thingy over here very much. I don't trust it. YouTube likes to lie to me a lot. I just realized y'all can see my shitty tattoos from when I was a kid. They look pretty good, though. I've preserved them pretty well. I haven't gotten tattoos in a while. But I'm too busy for that shit right now. I've got y'all to please. Let me fix that a bit. Okay. So, okay, so far we got 4 likes. So that tells me there's 4 people in the stream. Good enough. Let's do this. So, let me clear this up real quick. There we go. I gotta have it like minimized for some reason. That's one thing. Why is it always swapping my shit around? I don't understand this. Swap me back. That should about do it. Okay, so this is a request from Brandon Peters. The Enduring Mystery of Jack the Ripper from LEMMiNO? 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 How the shit do I say that? How do I say that? I don't know. I have no idea, but we're going to find out, aren't we? We are going to find out. All right, let me read the chat real fast because I'm sure some of y'all have some shit to say, especially about my shitty kid tattoos from back in the day. Pitbulls and MMA. That's a very interesting alias. It's funny. I'm vaping and drinking coffee, not tea, though. You're cute. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Apparently, I look really good for my age. But apparently I do. So thank you very much. I appreciate that. Or maybe you're just saying I'm cute because I'm also vaping or vaporizing, whatever. I think it's called vaping. And I'm drinking tea while you're drinking coffee. I try to stay away from coffee though because it can give you ulcers. So I stick with tea. It's much easier on you and healthier. All right, so we ready to see some LEMMiNO. Let's see some LEMMiNO.
Just let me know.
Okay, so that's how it's said. Just let me know. Like, hey, let me know what you're doing. Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense.
In the late 19th century, the city of London was the largest in the world, a sprawling metropolis and a melting pot for trade, finance, and people. But in the autumn of 1888, an horrific story emerged from the capital's East End. A story so dreadful it sent shockwaves around the world. One after another, destitute women of the East End fell victim to a vicious killer known as Jack the Ripper. Despite an extensive manhunt and a few close calls, the Ripper was never caught. Instead, the murders came to an abrupt end and left behind one of the greatest mysteries in the annals of crime.
Hey, y'all can let me know if like the way everything's framed is good for y'all or not. I could swap it around if y'all want, but I do a lot of this kind of stuff or this, or I'm like, so I do a lot of that kind of stuff, but it's hard to see when I'm like the one minimized. You know what I'm saying? So let me know if this framework that I got going on is good enough. Pitbulls and MMA. No, you're definitely cute. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Thank you. That makes me feel good inside in my little in my little blast cat badger machine in here. Makes it flutter. Thank you. Thank you. All right, let's continue.
In the East End of London, there's a district known as Whitechapel. In the late 19th century, Whitechapel was known for its overcrowded slums, where many of the capital's poor and unemployed had taken refuge. Day and night, an army of policemen would constantly patrol this labyrinthine network of dim-lit streets, courts, and alleys. One such place was a narrow passage known as George Yard. Near the north entrance of this passage was a residential complex known as George Yard Buildings. It was the morning of August the 7th, 1888, when an upstairs tenant named John Reeves headed out for work. Upon reaching the first floor landing, Reeves encountered the body of a woman lying upon her back in a pool of blood.
Almost like she was staged there, right? Not like she fell and that's how that happened. More like she was just staged there so that somebody would find her. That's how you know you're dealing with a sicko.
Horrified by the sight, he stumbled down to the street below in search for help. Constable Thomas Barrett was the first officer on the scene. He was soon joined by Dr. Timothy Killeen, who conducted a brief examination. The woman had been stabbed 39 times, primarily in the chest and abdomen. Dr. Killeen estimated that she had been dead for, quote, about 3 hours, thus placing the time of death at approximately 2:30 in the morning. The woman had likely been attacked where she was found, as no blood was found beyond the staircase landing. But this was strange, as none of the tenants in this crowded building had heard a single cry for help or a disturbance of any kind.
Well, depending on how she was stabbed, if it was done like in the middle of the night where everybody else is asleep, you know, some guy coming up to her with a gloved hand. I was trying to yell if you couldn't tell. So it's not a very big stretch to say this guy wore heavy gloves and put a hand over the mouth of this woman and stabbed her. Okay? It's also, you know, if you're going for a quick kill, it's also a good way. Because if you leave the mouth like exposed, even if you're choking somebody, they can still get out and cry for help. Somebody will still hear them within a certain distance. So you want to like basically lock down the jaw or keep the lips closed so that, you know, unless somebody's within like 5 feet, they're not going to hear a thing. And you can get the knife in and out real quick. And if you get somebody back here, I'm not going to tell you exactly where. They bleed out like that. So, yeah. Or you could put it through the neck if you got a solid blade. But, yeah. So, it would make sense knowing that she could have been attacked right there at the tenant's, like, you know, at one of the entry points, and nobody noticed. That would make sense.
One exception was Amy Hewitt, a tenant who claimed to have heard a lone cry of murder. But this was early in the evening of August the 6th, and the scream had emanated from outside the complex. Hewitt further explained, "The district round here is rather rough, and cries of murder are a frequent, if not nightly occurrence." The victim was eventually identified as 39-year-old Martha Tabram.
She was stabbed 39 times. That means the dude knew exactly how old she was. That means he either knew her or knew a lot about her. She was stabbed 39 times. Very interesting. Oh yeah, for everybody that keeps messaging me about getting a hold of me for stuff, my email is on the channel's about page. So you could either send an email there, or you can find me on Instagram at Blastcat Badger. It's also linked on the channel at the About page. So yeah, y'all can find me there.
Tabram was a mother of two and had separated from her husband many years prior. Her last known address was 19 George Street, a common lodging house less than 300 meters from the site of her death. Tabram had made a living through prostitution, and one of her associates was a woman named Mary Ann Connolly. Connolly testified that on the evening of August the 6th, she and Tabram had been out drinking with two soldiers. Then, shortly before midnight, the party of four had separated. Connolly took her client into Angel Alley, while Tabram guided hers into neighboring George Yard. It was the last time she saw Tabram alive. Barely 2 hours later, Constable Barrett had spoken to a soldier loitering near the north entrance of George Yard. The soldier had told Barrett that he was, quote, waiting for his mate who had gone away with a girl. Half an hour later, Tabram is presumed to have died. Both Connolly and Barrett were called upon to identify the soldiers, but all those accused could provide an alibi. One had been at home with his wife, another at an army base, and yet another in a completely different part of the city. This was enough for Inspector Edmund Reed, the lead investigator on the case, to abandon this line of inquiry.
It would make sense that these soldiers would not want to rat themselves out for seeing prostitutes. That would make sense. Even back then, it was not seen as like a kosher thing to do. So yeah, they probably should have pursued the line of inquiry still, or him being the lead detective inspector, he could have delegated to somebody else. He could have delegated that line of inquiry to someone else while he pursued another lead. But of course, that didn't happen. All right, pit bulls and MMA. My friend was grabbed by a guy who thought she was a child because she's only 4'8". Luckily, a neighbor saw, screamed, and a police officer was nearby and saved her. I tell people, get trained, get armed, okay? Especially if you're a woman. Especially if you're a woman. Get trained and get armed. Carry a taser and mace on you, or get a firearm. Get like a 22, okay? You can get like a cheapy, Glock 22, 10-round magazine, and it's nice and light, easy to shoot. You can put a lot of rounds in the same spot, and 22 will kill somebody. So if someone's trying to do something bad to you and you got a quick draw and you're popping them, that's a good way to make sure either someone's in the dirt or someone's gone. So yeah, definitely get trained and get armed, especially if you're a woman. And of course, I get called a sexist for that all the time. No, it's not sexism. It's literally physical reality. Majority of men are stronger than the majority of women. And most of the violent crime is committed by men. So yeah, get trained and get armed. And try not to travel alone. Seriously. But yeah, I'm happy your friend got saved. She got lucky. She's like the one in 1,000 people that gets kidnapped. That actually gets saved before they could be taken. The rest of them aren't so lucky. Fluffity Chuff Nuffles, what's up, my decent human member? Hope the group's doing well tonight. At work, gotta go, but I'll keep it running for the audio. Okay. Pitbulls and MMA. My dad gave me a 22. My lib friends won't listen to me. Yeah, well, I mean, there's no saving idiots. That's the fact. That's why I like. That's why I like when it comes to like my friends that I have that are like not of the same understanding of reality as myself. I just leave them alone. And then, you know, I've had some friends that bad stuff has happened to, but they know me well enough for me not to be feeling sorry for them, men and women. Um, and they usually cut when the bad stuff happens, which has happened to a few of them, unfortunately. They usually come to me later and they're like, "Hey, look, I'm trying to avoid this happening again. What can I do?" And I'm like, "The same thing I tell you to do all the time. It's not going to change no matter what else is going on." And sometimes they listen, sometimes they don't. I just leave it at that. I'm like, "Look, love you, but you brought this on yourself." And they call it victim blaming or whatever. If you make yourself a willing victim, then of course you're partly to blame. Even though I'm a guy, I know better than to go to Juarez as a civilian. I'll never go there. I'll never go there as retired Blast Cat Badger. Never. Kevin, I don't see that sexist if you're just trying to say that women should definitely be armed and have that peace of mind when they're out and about. Yep. But, anytime you mention stuff like that, the response is always, well, then how about you stop doing this and you stop doing that, putting it all on the other party. When if you're a willing lamb to slaughter, you're gonna get what you're asking for. Them's the facts. People can hate me all they want for telling the truth. All right, let's get back into the video.
Connolly and Barrett, having both picked out the wrong men, they could not be trusted again, as their evidence would be worthless. Even if a soldier had been responsible, no one could deduce a motive. The people of Whitechapel might have been accustomed to crime and violence, but the sheer brutality of this attack was as frightening as it was confounding.
I need to get some more tea. I'll be back. But I'm going to let the video play for y'all. I can hear it, though, all the way in the kitchen.
The crime is one of the most brutal that have occurred for some years. For a poor, defenseless woman to be outraged and stabbed in such a manner is almost beyond belief. These were the concluding remarks delivered at the final inquest held on August the 23rd. Only a week later, things would go from bad to worse. On the morning of August the 31st, a man named Robert Paul left his home on Foster Street and headed for work. After making a right turn into Bucks Row, he spotted a man standing in the road. The man turned around to face him and said, "Come and look over here. There's a woman lying on the pavement." The stranger was named Charles Cross, and he too had been on his way to work when he first caught sight of the woman. The two men now cautiously approached. The woman's hands were cold to the touch, and Cross believed she was dead. Paul, however, thought he could sense faint breathing. But instead of seeking immediate help, Cross and Paul were more concerned about being late for work. As such, they quickly resumed their morning commute, hoping to notify policemen along the way. Fortunately, Constable John Neal was just around the corner. Neal was equipped with a lantern and found the woman lying on her back with a deep cut across the throat. The wound was still bleeding and parts of her body were still warm. He was soon joined by Constable John Thane, who was sent at once to fetch a nearby doctor. Upon his arrival, shortly after 4 o'clock, Dr. Reese Llewellyn estimated that, quote, "She had not been dead more than half an hour." In other words, Cross and Paul had likely found the woman mere minutes after she was killed. Furthermore, three officers had patrolled the vicinity just a few minutes prior. Constable Neal had last inspected Box Row at approximately 3:15. So too had Sergeant Henry Kirby, whereas Constable Fane had merely passed the end of the street, none of whom had seen nor heard anything amiss. Upon the ball,
Which at that time in the morning, it's still going to be really dark out. Even with a lantern, if you have a lantern, those old school lanterns was just a candle with a little opening at the front so they could direct the light of the candle. That was about it. Uh, uh, or the lamp. Um, but at that time, in the middle of the night, unless every light on the street is on, it's gonna be more like when I've done missions in Afghanistan in the at like 0 dark 30, and the whole village is completely dark. So even if you have a flashlight and you got a really powerful one, you can only see so far. And if somebody's wearing black and you're shining a flashlight around, unless their clothing's reflective, you're not going to know they're there. And of course, us doing those missions, we have thermals and we've got nod and all that stuff. We even got the 20s, which uses both uh, uh, optical night vision and thermals filtered in. So, of course, we would be able to find somebody real easy. But back in them days, them streets are pitch black. The light source that they're using is blinding them, technically. So somebody could be to either side of them. If they're not flashing the light constantly around, they're not going to see shit. So it makes sense that when he passed the other side of that street and he didn't even really try to go down that street and look down it, he wasn't going to see anything. So it makes sense that somebody missed her.
body's removal to the mortuary, a shocking discovery was made. Apart from 2 incisions in the throat, the woman had also been, quote, disemboweled. No organs had been removed, but Dr. Llewellyn found, quote, several incisions running across the abdomen. He also believed that the killer possessed, quote, some rough anatomical knowledge, for he seemed to have attacked all the vital parts. The victim was quickly identified. Her name was Mary Ann Nichols, and she had turned 43 just 5 days before the murder. Nichols had at least 6 children, and her last known address was a common lodging house at 56 Flower and Dean Street. On the night of her death, Nichols had been turned away from a lodging house on Thrall Street as she lacked the funds to pay for a bed. Seeking to raise the money through prostitution, Nichols would then venture down Osborne Street before meeting her friend, Ellen Holland. The two of them shared a brief exchange, but Nichols was visibly drunk. When they parted ways around 2:30, Holland saw Nichols staggering eastward along Whitechapel Road. Barely an hour later, she was found dead. Apart from the body itself, the killer had left nothing in their wake. No blood trail, no murder weapon, no witnesses. Inspector Joseph Helson, the lead investigator on the case, stated that, quote, not an atom of evidence can be obtained to connect any person with the crime.
So I'll read it for you. Inquiries have also been made from the persons who reside in the locality, watchmen who were employed in adjoining premises, PCs on the adjoining beats, and in every quarter from which it was thought any useful information might be obtained. But at present, not an atom of evidence can be obtained to connect any person with the crime. That's pretty incredible, but it's not too surprising for the time. Back then, unless you had like 2 cops per street, you were not stopping nothing from happening, and you are rarely going to catch anybody.
While the Nichols case ground to a screeching halt, its similarities with the Martha Tavern case had not gone unnoticed. In both cases, the attack had been needlessly ferocious, and there was no discernible motive. Both victims were prostitutes of roughly the same age and moved in the same circles. The only meaningful difference was their injuries. Cabram had been repeatedly stabbed, whereas Nichols had suffered multiple slash wounds. Differences aside, the prevailing assumption was that the same deranged individual had committed both murders, a conviction that would only grow stronger in the days that followed.
I gotta say, I kind of like the music. It's got like that kind of neo noir type of feel to it. I kind of like that.
As the sun was rising on September the 8th, a man named John Richardson was on his way to work. At 4:45, he made a quick stop at 29 Hanbury Street. He went through the entrance and out the back door by way of a cramped hallway. Richardson then sat down on the backyard steps before grabbing a knife to trim a vexing piece of leather from his boot. Once satisfied, he left the building and shut the front door behind him. About an hour later, a third-floor tenant of the same address, John Davis, plodded downstairs and into the hallway. The front door was now wide open, but the one in the back was closed. When Davis went to open it, he found the bloodied remains of a woman lying on her back just below the steps. Inspector Joseph Chandler was the first officer on the scene. After a brief inspection, he sent at once for a medic. Dr. George Phillips arrived at 6:30 and found the woman, quote, terribly mutilated. The throat had been, quote, dissevered deeply, whereas the abdomen had been, quote, entirely laid open. The intestines had been, quote, lifted out of the body and placed by the shoulder of the corpse. The body was then conveyed to the mortuary, while Inspector Chandler and Dr. Phillips conducted a sweep of the backyard. Most of what they found belonged to the tenants of the building, but just below the resting place of the woman's feet, they found a small piece of cloth and 2 combs. The items had likely belonged to the victim, but it seemed to Dr. Phillips that they had been deliberately positioned and arranged by the killer. The post-mortem revealed that 2 brass rings had been forcefully removed from the victim's left hand. These rings were nowhere to be found. Portions of the victim's abdomen had also gone missing, including the womb. Dr. Phillips believed that, quote, the mode in which these portions were extracted showed some anatomical knowledge. This point was greatly expanded upon at the subsequent inquest. The injuries had been made by someone who had considerable anatomical skill and knowledge. There were no meaningless cuts. For instance, no mere slaughterer of animals could have carried out these operations. It must have been someone accustomed to the post-mortem room. The victim was quickly identified as Annie Chapman. Chapman's date of birth is a bit uncertain, but she was roughly 47 at the time of her death. She had at least 7 children, but was tragically only survived by 2. Her last known address was a common lodging house at 35 Dorset Street. On the night of her death, Chapman had been denied accommodations as she lacked the funds to pay for a bed. She was escorted off the premises by the night watchman, who then saw her vanish into a nearby alleyway. What happened to Chapman over the next few hours, nobody knows. Her whereabouts during this time is a complete mystery. But unlike the 2 previous cases, a witness in the Chapman case might have caught a glimpse of the killer. At 5:30 on the morning of September the 8th, a woman named Elizabeth Long spotted a man and a woman conversing outside 29 Hanbury Street. Long was positive that the woman she'd seen was Annie Chapman, but the man had stood with his back towards Long, so she never saw his face. Long did, however, manage to overhear a fragment of their conversation. The man had posed the question, "Will you?" to which the woman responded, "Yes." Now, a lasting point of contention in the Chapman case is the time of death. According to Dr. Phillips, when he arrived at 6:30, Chapman had been dead for, quote, "at least 2 hours." That would place her death at around 4:30. But according to Long, she saw Chapman alive a full hour later. Then there's the testimony of John Richardson. Richardson was the son of one of the tenants in the building. At 4:45, he made a routine checkup on the door to the basement, which had previously suffered a break-in. When he found it secure, he sat down on the backyard steps to trim a piece of leather from his boot. Even though he sat mere centimeters from the murder site, Richardson did not see a body. He was adamant on this point. "I could not have failed to notice the deceased if she had been there." To muddle the timeline even further, there's the testimony of Albert Kadosh. About 20 minutes past 5, Kadosh had gone through the backyard of 27 Hanbury Street when he heard voices coming from nearby. They were barely audible, however, and Kadosh had only made out the word "no." A few minutes later, he heard something falling against the wooden fence dividing the 2 yards. There's no one way to untangle this web of contradictions, but Dr. Phillips did concede the possibility that he'd miscalculated. That, quote, "the coldness of the morning and the great loss of blood" had skewed his opinion, which was largely based on the warmth of the body. So, presuming that Dr. Phillips did miscalculate, and the recollections of Long and Kadosh were off by a few minutes, that would place Chapman's death at around 5:30 in the morning.
Which, that would make sense. That would make a lot of sense because it got really cold at night. It gets really cold at night over there, especially during the winter. So it would make sense that, while she's bleeding out, she would go cold really fast. So it would make sense that the time of death estimate would be a little off. But also people's watches were not very good back then either. Not everybody synced their watch all the time. So somebody could be a few minutes off or dozens of minutes off. So it's kind of hard to know if there's any accuracy to any of these accounts at all. But yeah. I wonder if there was any lamplight in the backyard. Because if the last two guys to go through there before the body was discovered and it was pitch black outside and he had the door open, at a certain angle, a door will block a huge amount of your view. So it's quite possible that he did miss her body being there. But of course, this is just speculation.
By this point, the dim light of dawn would have provided the tenants of 29 Hanbury Street an unobstructed view of the murder site, some of whom had even slept with their windows open. In spite of this, the killer managed to evade detection and even made time to range the victim's possessions. As the tally of victims gradually mounted, the public grew increasingly anxious. They were not only frightened by the murders, but frustrated with the police and their perceived incompetence. Even across the pond were the efforts of the police fiercely criticized. "The London police and detective force is probably the stupidest in the world." Were these mocking quotes?
Oh, man. That's awesome. That's freaking awesome. That's awesome. The freaking Yanks are making fun of y'all now. Like, they didn't pull any punches back then, did they? Then again, news media has been basically the same throughout all of time. It's just our awareness of how much they like to spice things up or twist a story or outright lie. Is just we have more awareness of it now. But back then, everybody took it as gospel.
And illustrations failed to capture were the overwhelming odds stacked in favor of the perpetrator. The police were up against someone who seemingly struck without motive, someone who left no murder weapon and few witnesses. On top of that, the East End was severely overcrowded, while the police were understaffed. As one newspaper put it, a man in the East End of London is a grain of sand, as invisible and almost as much beyond identification amid the masses. At no point would this become more apparent than during the events of September the 30th. On September the 29th, a routine Saturday meeting was held at the Socialist Club on Berners Street. The meeting came to a close around midnight, all but a few members returned home. Those who remained proceeded to drink and socialize. Half an hour in September the 30th, Joseph Labe stepped outside to get some fresh air. Labe used the side entrance leading into Dutville's yard and lingered for about 10 minutes. Moments after Labe had gone back inside, Morris Eagle accessed the building via the same entrance. He too was a member of the club and had just returned after escorting a woman home. Neither of them noticed anything unusual. 20 minutes later, the sound of a horse and carriage could be heard trotting down Berners Street. The driver was Louis Diemschutz, the steward of the clubhouse. When Diemschutz drove into Dutville's yard, his pony abruptly veered to the left. When he looked down to his right, he thought he could discern something in the darkness. Diemschutz stepped down from his barrow, and after lighting a match, could see a woman lying on her side against the wall. Without even knowing if she was, quote, drunk or dead, Diemschutz rushed inside the club to check on his wife. When he found her safe and sound, he alerted the other members, and a small crowd soon gathered outside. They could now see that the woman's throat had been, quote, fearfully cut, and that, quote, a stream of blood was trickling down the yard. Eagle, Diemschutz, and a few others promptly dispersed to find a policeman. While a growing crowd of bystanders waited for authorities to arrive, there was no sign of the perpetrator. But across the city, less than a kilometer to the west.
So, a lot of people are shocked at how quickly something like this happens. But here's a fact: human beings are very soft. I don't care how much muscle you have, I don't care how big you are. If I got a good solid blade and I keep that sucker sharp and smooth, it only takes about, at most 10 pounds of force to go clean through. You just come up and done. Done. Let them drop, and you can put a cloth around the blade to collect any drip. Walk away. That's how easy it was. And it still technically is that easy to do, even to this day. If someone knows what they're doing, it's not that hard, which is a terrifying prospect for anybody, really. So, yeah, it's no surprise to me that these types of killings would happen so fast. Then again, I have experience with training for stuff like this while out on mission. Now, rarely did we ever have to engage in hand-to-hand. Most of our engagement was like a distance ambush or clearing a room with firearms. but there's been a few times. It's not that hard. And you don't especially have to be that strong either. You really don't. So this stuff can happen with a quickness.
An even more ghoulish discovery was about to be made. At 1:30 of the same morning, Constable Edward Watkins patrolled an open space known as Mitre Square. Watkins' beat would take him through the square about once every 13 minutes, and on this occasion, it was deserted. But in the time it took Watkins to complete another rotation, Mitre Square was turned into a crime scene. I next came in at 1:44. I turned to the right. I saw the body of a woman lying there on her back. I saw her throat was cut and her bowels protruding. The stomach was ripped up. She was lying in a pool of blood. Dr. George Cicada and Dr. Frederick Brown soon converged upon the scene. They found terrible injuries inflicted upon the woman's face, throat, and abdomen. The intestines had been, quote, drawn out to a large extent and placed over the right shoulder. Among the many lacerations to the face, Dr. Brown noted that, quote, the lobe and auricle of the right ear was cut obliquely through. Based on their expert opinions, coupled with the testimony of Watkins, the woman had died within minutes of her body being found. Back in Berners Street, Dr. Frederick Blackwell and Dr. George Phillips had reached the same conclusion. The woman in Dutville's yard had died within minutes of her body being found. But unlike previous victims, she had only suffered injuries to the throat. There were no abdominal mutilations or anything else by which to connect the attack to the others.
So most likely it wasn't the same. Most likely it wasn't the same person doing this. Because to cover half a kilometer in that time, that's quite a bit. That is quite a bit. These happened pretty much around the same time as each other. So that means there had to be two different people. One, the first person that's doing a certain MO, and the other one who's just cutting throats. That sounds like two different people to me. But for all we know, they were coordinated.
But the murder in Dutville's yard and the one in Mitre Square were separated by less than 1 kilometer and some 45 minutes. This allowed for a chilling possibility. It was suspected then, as it continues to be today, that when Diemschutz came clattering through the gateway, he unwittingly interrupted the murder. The killer may even have become trapped inside Dutville's yard because the gate on Berners Street was the only point of entry. Perhaps they saw an opportunity to escape when Diemschutz then rushed inside the club. From there, it would have taken them less than 15 minutes to reach Mitre Square. Plenty of time to hunt for another victim. But it must be emphasized that this is pure speculation.
And of course, what I'm saying is also speculation. But even 15 minutes and somehow missing the beat cop. And they had to know that the beat cop was there, that the PC was there. I don't know. That would still take a lot. That would still take quite a bit.
There is no evidence to suggest the two murders were even connected. The woman in Dutville's yard was identified as 44-year-old Elizabeth Stride. Stride was a Swedish immigrant who'd lived in London for over 2 decades. Following the death of her husband, she had made a living through prostitution. Her last known address was a common lodging house at 32 Flower and Dean Street. On the night of her death, Stride had been seen by quite an abundance of witnesses. First, she was seen in the company of a, quote, respectably dressed man around 11 o'clock. About a quarter to midnight, Stride was seen talking to a man who was, quote, decently dressed and had the appearance of a clerk. Then, only a few minutes before the murder, Stride was seen in the company of a man by Constable William Smith. The man was carrying a small parcel wrapped in newspaper and was of, quote, respectable appearance. It's unclear whether these descriptions are of the same person or if Stride accosted multiple clients as the night progressed. There were other witnesses, some less credible than others, but the one that really stood out from the rest was Israel Schwartz. About a quarter to 1, Schwartz had been walking down Burness Street. As he came up on Dutwell's yard, he witnessed a man throwing a woman to the ground in front of the entrance. The woman had, quote, screamed 3 times, but not very loudly. Schwartz would later identify this woman as Elizabeth Stride. Schwartz did not try to intervene, but opted instead to simply cross the street. That's when he spied a second man on the opposite side who was lighting a pipe. The man who attacked the woman then appeared to address the second man by shouting the name Lipsky. The pipe smoker then proceeded to follow Schwartz before eventually breaking away. When taken at face value, this story appears to suggest that the killer had an accomplice by the name of Lipsky. This was indeed the interpretation of some government officials. But Inspector Frederick Abeline, one of the lead investigators on the case, had a very different interpretation. You see, the name Lipsky had gained notoriety in 1887 when a Jewish man by the name of Israel Lipsky was convicted of murder. Owing to the publicity of that case, the surname Lipsky had become an anti-Semitic slur. Abeline therefore deduced that the man who shouted Lipsky was directing an insult at Schwartz, who was described as having a, quote, strong Jewish appearance. The man with a pipe, meanwhile, may have been an innocent passerby who became frightened along with Schwartz. Whether Abeline's interpretation is correct, it's doubtful we'll ever truly know. Nevertheless, Schwartz's account is compelling, as he conceivably witnessed the moment when Elizabeth Stride was attacked.
Very interesting. This goes a lot more in depth than a lot of the Jack the Ripper documentaries and breakdowns I've seen before. It goes a lot more in depth. LEMMiNO does a damn good job.
Back in Mitre Square, a large crowd of spectators had assembled upon the scene, all driven by their morbid curiosity to get a glimpse of the body. The post-mortem revealed that the killer had extracted a few organs, including the womb and left kidney. According to Dr. Brown, this extraction required, quote, a good deal of knowledge, which he likened to that of a butcher. By contrast, Dr. Cicada did not find any signs of, quote, great anatomical skill. The woman in Mitre Square was identified as 46-year-old Catherine Eddowes. Eddowes had at least 5 children, but after escaping her abusive husband, she had become estranged from her family. Her last known address was a common lodging house at 55 Flower and Dean Street. On the night of her death, Eddowes had been out drinking. She got so drunk that around 8:30, she was found lying on the sidewalk in Aldgate High Street, surrounded by a crowd. The commotion attracted a few officers, who then escorted Eddowes to a nearby police station. There, she remained locked in a cell until 1 o'clock in the morning. After being released from jail, Eddowes was likely spotted in the company of a man in the vicinity of Mitre Square. Only one of the 3 witnesses, Joseph Lavender, had paid close attention to the couple. The man had the appearance of a sailor and wore a, quote, reddish handkerchief around his neck. While Lavender did identify the woman as Catherine Eddowes, he never saw her face. Nevertheless, this sighting was only made some 10 minutes before Eddowes' body was discovered by Constable Watkins. What's so incredibly tragic about the Eddowes case is how narrowly the killer escaped justice. First of all, the only private residence in Mitre Square was occupied by a policeman and his family. They had slept right next to an upper floor window overlooking the murder site. Second of all, a night watchman and retired policeman had been cleaning a warehouse within earshot of the murder site. He would routinely hear the footsteps of patrolling officers, yet heard nothing at the time of the murder. Finally, Constable James Harvey had glanced into Mitre Square at roughly 20 minutes to 2. That's right in between the sighting by Lavender and the body's discovery. Harvey should have had an unobstructed view of the murder site, yet he failed to notice anything suspicious. Was it too dark? Was the killer standing just a few meters away, cloaked in shadow? Did one or more witnesses get the time wrong? While the killer did ultimately escape, they did not do so without leaving a trace. Shortly before 3 o'clock, a blood-stained piece of cloth was found near the entrance to a building a few blocks to the northeast. It proved to be a ripped portion of the apron worn by Eddowes. The patch had evidently been torn off and then discarded by the killer upon their escape. Now, on the wall above this patch of apron, someone had written a message. The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing. To this day, both the meaning and the author of this message remain in doubt. Was it written by the killer? Was it an attempt to cast suspicion upon or even away from the Jewish community? Was it completely unrelated to the murder? Similar questions would soon be raised by a few letters which had supposedly been written and posted by the killer. Three days before the murder of Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes, the Central News Agency of London received a letter in the post, the author of which claimed responsibility for the recent murders and to be planning for the, quote, next job. Then, in the aftermath of the two killings, the same agency received a blood-smeared postcard. It contained details about the atrocities, which the author described as a, quote, double event. On the off chance that the letters were genuine, the police decided to make them public. The hope was that someone would recognize the handwriting. Unfortunately, no one ever did. Instead, it merely served to advertise the name with which the letters had been signed. Opinions on the letters' authenticity were divided back then and continue to be today. Most notably, the Dear Boss letter had promised to, quote, clip the lady's ears off and send them to the police. The police never received such a package, and neither of the two victims had had their ears removed. But you may recall that the right earlobe of Eddowes had been, quote, cut obliquely through. Was this a botched attempt by the killer to keep their promise? Or was it merely one of numerous lacerations with no connection to the letter?
At this point, it's just straight up confusing. I don't know about y'all, but at this point, it's straight up confusion all the way through. This seems highly uncoordinated. Whereas before, it seemed premeditated and deliberate. Now it just seems whimsical. Very interesting. And I know for a fact they haven't found out who it was to this day. They have no idea.
The contents of the letters notwithstanding, modern linguistic analysis does suggest that they were penned by the same hand. So, hoaxes or not, the authors were likely one and the same. However, the handwriting bore, quote, no resemblance at all to the message written above the torn patch of apron. Now, the publication of the letters inspired an onslaught of copycats. Agencies all over London were soon inundated with correspondence imitating the other two. But at least one of them might have been genuine, not because of the contents of the letter, but rather the contents of a box with which it was delivered. On October the 16th, a man named George Lusk received a small package in the post. Lusk was the chairman of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, a small group of local tradesmen who sought to identify the killer. The package consisted of a letter and a cardboard box containing half a kidney. The doctors who examined the kidney all agreed that it was human, but whether it was the same left kidney removed from the body of Eddowes could not be determined. It could, for instance, have been an elaborate hoax by a medical student or someone with access to human organs. The author of the accompanying letter, meanwhile, insisted that the kidney did belong to the victim and that they had fried and eaten the other half. A popular theory at the time, and one that still is today, was that some of the letters had been fabricated by the press. According to Chief Inspector John Littlechild, the letters were, quote, a smart piece of journalistic work. Assistant Commissioner Robert Anderson dismissed the letters as, quote, the creation of an enterprising London journalist. Meanwhile, Chief Constable Melville McNaughton thought he could discern the, quote, stained forefinger of the journalist. There are a few candidates for who this journalist might have been, but there is no solid evidence against any one of them. Whether it was a hoax by an enterprising journalist or the genuine prose of the Ripper, the letters did nonetheless receive widespread attention. They commanded space in virtually every newspaper and dominated much of the public discourse throughout October, a month which passed without a single atrocity bearing the signature marks of Jack the Ripper. Perhaps it was finally over. It is pretty certain that the master has become frightened and has suspended his horrible work for the present, if not for good.
Oh man, and it doesn't help that a bunch of people decided to have a laugh at the expense of the dead in imitating these letters and providing even further confusion. Man, my brain's fried at this point. Completely fried. I don't know about y'all, but there's no heads or tails to be made of this part.
On the morning of November the 9th, a merchant and property owner named John McCarthy was going through his bookkeeping. McCarthy was the landlord of Miller's Court, and the tenants of room 13 had fallen behind on their rent. McCarthy sent at once for his assistant, Thomas Boyer, to collect the money at 11:45. After knocking twice without response, Boyer went around the corner to peer through a window, but his view was obstructed by a coat or curtain, so Boyer had to reach through a broken window pane to pull it aside. That's when he saw the severely mutilated body of a woman lying upon a bed in the corner of the room. Miller's Court was soon crawling with police, but the door to room 13 was locked and had to be forced open with a pickaxe. What they found inside was truly the stuff of nightmares. The sight we saw, I cannot drive away from my mind. It looked more like the work of a devil than of a man. The whole scene is more than I can describe. I hope I may never see such a sight again. Dr. George Phillips described the body as, quote, cut all to pieces. Dr. Thomas Bond described the woman's face as, quote, hacked beyond recognition. The abdomen had been, quote, emptied of its viscera, while the throat had been, quote, severed all round, down to the bone. The body had been monstrously disfigured, with loose organs dispersed all around it. The room itself was sparsely furnished and offered little in the way of clues. 2 tables, 1 or 2 chairs, and a small cabinet. Amongst the ashes of a fireplace, the police found patches of burned clothing. Had the killer tried to dispose of evidence, or had it merely been used for warmth and light? The victim was identified almost immediately. Her name was Mary Jane Kelly, and she was the tenant of 13 Miller's Court. But nearly everything about Kelly's life is shrouded in mystery. She was presumably of Welsh or Irish descent and in her mid-20s, making her the youngest victim by far. But given that no matching records of a Mary Jane Kelly have been found, it's probable that she was using a fake identity. In any case, Kelly had not been living alone. Up until a few days before the murder, she had cohabited with a man named Joseph Barnett. They had only separated on October the 30th because Barnett disapproved of Kelly's prostitution and the people with whom she associated. But they did see each other again. On the evening of November.
Don't we all, my man? Don't we all? Don't we all? If you find out your girl is doing some HO3 type of stuff, get away as fast as you can.
November the 8th, Barnett paid Kelly a visit. Upon his arrival, he found Kelly in the company of a woman who was just about to leave. Unfortunately, there are conflicting accounts about who this woman was, when Barnett arrived, and how long he stayed. If we choose to believe Barnett, he arrived at some point between 7 and a quarter to 8 and left before 9 o'clock. Shortly before midnight, Kelly was spotted in the company of a man by her neighbor, Marianne Cox. When Cox passed the couple, they were about to enter Kelly's room. Cox bid Kelly good night, but she was, quote, very much intoxicated and barely able to respond. Once they had gone inside, Cox could hear Kelly singing. When Cox then left the court about an hour later, Kelly could still be heard singing. By 2 o'clock, Kelly had apparently ventured back outside, where she was spotted by a man named George Hutchinson. The two of them were supposedly well acquainted, and Kelly had asked if he could spare a few coins. But Hutchinson was broke, and Kelly was desperate for money, so they soon parted ways. Moments later, Hutchinson observed Kelly being accosted by a well-dressed man. The two of them had a seemingly jovial interaction and began walking north. Hutchison found it suspicious that such a well-dressed man would seek the company of a woman like Kelly. As such, when the couple passed them by, he scrutinized the man's appearance. He was, for instance, carrying a pair of gloves in his right hand and a small parcel in his left. Hutchison decided to shadow the couple as they proceeded to Miller's Court. Before they vanished up the court, the man handed Kelly a red handkerchief, and she had supposedly told him, all right, my dear, come along. You will be comfortable. Hutchinson remained in the vicinity until 3 o'clock, but neither Kelly nor the man reappeared. At roughly the same time, Cox returned home. In stark contrast to the loud singing upon her last departure, Cox was now struck by the complete absence of sound and light from Kelly's room. Finally, at approximately 4 o'clock, a tenant.
Give me a second, getting a call. Yeah. What's up? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, you're asking me to get the tub ready here? Okay. Well, it's up to you. Whichever one's faster and easier. It's up to you. Yeah. Good. Huh? Not that I've seen. Well, which is easier, you taking him or me taking him? Yes. Nice and smooth. Okay. 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 All right, back to the video.
And above and a woman across from Kelly's room heard cries of murder. The voice was that of a woman, and it appeared to emanate from nearby. Meanwhile, other denizens of the court heard no screams at all. According to Dr. Bond, Kelly died between 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning. Dr. Phillips placed the time of death a few hours later. But some witnesses were quite adamant that they had seen or even spoken to Kelly as late as 8 or 10 o'clock in the morning. Keep in mind that her body was discovered at a quarter to 11. These contradictions are difficult to reconcile, and the precise time of death eludes us to this day. Mary Jane Kelly is typically regarded as the Ripper's final victim. Along with Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, and Catherine Eddowes, she is part of the canonical five, the five victims most likely to have been slain by the same hand. Martha Tabram might have been a victim of Jack the Ripper, but opinions are divided. The same is true of at least a handful of other cases. Even the canonical five are not without controversy, so the total number of victims is a matter of debate. Presuming that Kelly was indeed the final victim, one has to wonder why. Why did the murders come to such a sudden end? Did a Ripper give in to fears of being caught? Were they imprisoned for a different crime? Perhaps they succumbed to an illness or committed suicide. Could they have migrated to another country? Perhaps they deliberately changed their modus operandi to confuse the police. The possibilities are virtually endless, which means there is no shortage of suspects. Following the murder of Mary Ann Nichols, a rumor began to circulate that someone called Leather Apron was in the habit of abusing prostitutes. The name quickly made its way into the press, and soon enough it became synonymous with a killer. In fact, Leather Apron was the predominant pseudonym before Jack the Ripper. But the man identified as Leather Apron was soon cleared of all suspicion. His real name was John Piser, and he was in a different part of London on the night when Nichols was attacked. This misguided manhunt is somewhat emblematic of the whole investigation. The police pursued even the most tenuous of leads due to a lack of evidence and mounting pressure from the public. They interviewed thousands, investigated hundreds, and developed numerous theories along the way. In the words of Inspector Frederick Abeline, theories. We were lost almost in theories. There were so many of them. In an effort to narrow down the search, the police used a primitive form of criminal profiling, The idea was to analyze the available evidence to try and gauge what sort of person had committed the crimes. This profile was prepared by Dr. Thomas Bond, and he described the Ripper as a strong, middle-aged man with an inoffensive appearance who dressed respectably. Bond's most controversial assessment was that the killer possessed, quote, no scientific nor anatomical knowledge. This stood in direct opposition to the opinions of his peers, most of whom ascribed the Ripper with at least a basic understanding of anatomy. Based on the witness accounts, the Ripper was a man of average height with a medium to stout build in his late 20s to mid-30s. He wore dark clothes, including a hat of some sort, and had a mustache. But this sort of aggregation or tabulation of accounts can be quite deceptive. Not only are many details inconsistent, but they could be describing entirely different people. For all we know, none of the witnesses ever laid eyes on Jack the Ripper. So much is up for debate that one can build a case against almost any suspect. Some have even entertained the possibility that the Ripper was a woman or possibly a man disguised as a woman. While Jill or Jackie the Ripper is an interesting theory, it has failed to achieve any widespread support.
So basically at this point, there are way too many hands in the same cookie jar. Everybody wants credit to catch Jack the Ripper. Everybody's coming up with their own theories. Everybody's going for their own suspects, it seems. It's to the point of ridiculousness, essentially. I gotta pull up my cameras because the ex is supposed to be bringing my son back at some point. So I gotta do that number. Anyway, let me look at the chat. Nobody's saying anything in the chat, it looks like. But yeah, quite interesting, right? Quite interesting. Hey, James J., you better watch this. You better watch this. I'm doing it for you. Anyway, let's keep going.
What is rarely in dispute is that the Ripper was either a resident of or otherwise familiar with the East End. After all, he managed to narrowly evade capture on multiple occasions, which implies intimate knowledge of byways and patrol routes. He likely had some form of employment, as the murders were committed around weekends and public holidays, and he may have had some degree of anatomical knowledge. With this unshakable profile in hand, let's take a closer look at a few suspects. The question is, where do we even begin?
I'm getting tired from just trying to even think at this point. Like, I'm getting exhausted just trying to think about this. Look at how many people are here. Ridiculous. Ridiculous. Pit bulls and MMA. That's the first I've heard of Jackie the Ripper. Who knows? Pit bulls and MMA, arrow. Or I don't know what that means. I don't know what that thing means. What's that supposed to mean? Straight shot? Or shoot shots or something? Okay, my ex is here with my son, so I'm gonna let the video play. But y'all toss some stuff in the chat about this, okay?
According to criminal profiler and FBI Special Agent John Douglas, the Ripper was not only a local, but was likely interviewed by the police. If Douglas is correct, the Ripper might be someone we've already met, either a witness or a person close to one of the victims. What about John Richardson, the witness in the Chapman case who sat down on the backyard steps to trim a piece of leather from his boot? Richardson was indeed suspected by the police, but they found, quote, not a shred of evidence against him. His mother also lived on the premises, so he had good reason to be there. What about George Hutchinson, the witness who followed Mary Jane Kelly after she was accosted by a well-dressed client? Hutchinson never clarified his motivation for shadowing the couple. He merely stated that he was surprised to see a man so well-dressed in the company of a woman like Kelly. Was he surprised because he was concerned? Was he jealous? Was it about money? After all, Hutchinson was broke, and the client appeared to be wealthy. Perhaps he waited outside the court with the intention of mugging this well-dressed client. There are many question marks surrounding Hutchinson. He has never been positively identified, so next to nothing is known about his life. This makes it very difficult to build a strong case against him. Hutchinson was interrogated by the police, but ultimately convinced Inspector Frederick Abeline that he was telling the truth. But not every witness attracted such attention from the police. Take, for instance, Charles Cross, the man who discovered the body of Marian Nichols. On the morning of August the 31st, Charles Cross left his home on Doveton Street and headed for work. When he turned into Bucks Row, he happened upon the body of Marian Nichols. Moments later, he was joined by Robert Paul, and events transpired as previously described.
Okay, so at this point, it's basically trying to get into the different main, the different main suspects. Bub, this is too much. This is too much. Too much for my head. My brain hurts. The two brain cells I have are struggling not to rub together and annihilate. Okay? Man. I mean, I guess it's somewhat kind of sort of fun to speculate, but at the same time, this is a long like dead and gone thing. I mean, it's kind of cool to hear more in-depth review of everything that happened. But at the same time, it's like this is something that isn't exactly special. Around the same time period, there was murders like this happening all the time. So, I mean, there's not too much we're going to get from this, honestly. But what do y'all think? What do y'all think? Y'all tell me in the chat real quick. Y'all tell me in the chat real quick. I'm gonna have to end this pretty soon anyway because my son just got back from being with his mom for a few hours, and I'm gonna have to like give him a bath and floss his teeth, make sure he brushes his teeth right, and does his mouthwash and gets ready for bed. Pitbulls and MMA message retracted. What message? Guten Morgen, Annette Fisher. And hey, James J., you better be watching this, bub. You better be watching this. I got through till the end and I remembered how many freaking suspects they had. And I'm like, so what do y'all think? Should I try to continue for as long as I can on this, or can I call it good at this point? What do y'all think? Okay, so some of y'all have seen this before. Pit bulls and MMA, we'll probably never get to the truth. Most likely never. Most likely. So yeah. Okay, to remind people, in the chat is the Discord link, so you can join the Discord and get in there. You can also private message me on there as well. It just might take a minute to get to yours, unless you don't get caught by the filter. Then you might get a quick response depending on what you send. But yeah, at this point, I'm like checked out. My brain. I don't know if you can see the smoke coming out of my ears. But yeah. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's just too much. It's just too much. James J., I am sorry I couldn't go all the way through. I'm sorry, but this stuff's fried my brain, and I'm more of a caveman than I am a sleuth, so to speak. But there we go, folks. The Enduring Mystery of Jack the Ripper by LEMMiNO. They do a lot better of a job than most of the documentary series I've seen. A lot better of a job. But I think it's like I don't know. I think it's just like the droll, essentially, that we go through on these. But yeah, there we go. There we go. So what do y'all think? Let me know in the chat real quick. What did y'all think? Or at least those of y'all who saw it long enough to have an opinion. Pit bulls and MMA, a little smoke. Yeah, I thought so. I thought so. All right. Well, If y'all got nothing else, I think I can call it here. Besides, we've got an hour and a half already, and only y'all are going to be the ones watching this so far as I know. So yeah, I mean, the first part of it was pretty intense, pretty in depth. Um, trouble is, once we get towards the ending where there's like so many suspects that are tied into so many ways, it's just like absolute brain drain. And I don't have a big brain. Any shoe. There we go, folks. There we go. Pitbulls and MMA. I'm happy you got to catch a live stream. Thank you very much for joining. Thank you for the compliment. I appreciate it. Also, if you're new to getting into the live stream and you're not in the Discord, the link is in the chat right now. So click that link. It'll take you to Discord. Just sign up for Discord, get into the Discord server. And that's where I usually post literally everything. And people can private message me on there as well. So yeah. That being said, be good. Seriously, be good. There's enough anger, rage, hatred, and evil going on in the world. We don't need to add to it. So be good. Be safe. Don't compromise safety and security. No matter where you live or where you work, don't compromise on that. If where you work makes you compromise your safety and security, don't work there. If where you live makes you compromise safety and security, pack up and move to a place that doesn't make you do that. I did, and I'm much better off for it. So, yeah, and then make a good life for yourselves. We don't know what's going to happen. I mean, we just saw Jack the Ripper. Death can come in an instant in a multitude of ways. We never know when, we never know how. So make the best of it that you can right now. So, all that being said, then I will see y'all in the next one. And the uploads I will do tomorrow. I'm going to try to upload a bunch more stuff earlier and do another live stream tomorrow night. So, yeah, that being said, Last Cat Badger out.